the new Iranian president's message at the UN yesterday?
I think a couple of things that President Rouhani did yesterday, which were key, was that first he addressed the domestic audience in Iran, especially the hardline audience that I think has been a little bit wary of seeing where this is going to go after Ahmadinejad. And he says, and at the same time compare it to the Iraqi sanctions, which was very big.
About those sanctions, there has a lot been made in the U.S. corporate media about Iran snubbing the U.S. Maureen Dowd said today, talking about President Obama, the man formerly hailed as a messiah was having a bad day. The Iranians snubbed him. The Brazilians upbraided him. Ted Cruz filibustered him. And you just know that behind the scenes, the Russians are messing with him. But a lot was made over the weekend. White House officials saying that President Obama possibly would be shaking the hand of Rouhani. And so it is believed that it was Rouhani that wasn't willing, at least until yesterday, to do that.
Yeah, it seems that from what Rouhani said yesterday to Christian Amanpour last night in his interview, that the Iranians are willing to engage, but that it became too complicated last minute and that there wasn't enough time to kind of have that meeting take place. I think it's that it would be too quick. And Rouhani and his camp in Iran still have hardliners that would not, I think, appreciate something happening as quickly as this. But the message is there, both from Rouhani and from Obama, that both presidents seem to want to engage, and tomorrow high-level negotiations will be taking place. And so that's a step in the right direction.
Well, you've also spent a large part of the last 9 or 10 years in Iran. So could you talk about some of the effects of these sanctions in the day-to-day lives of the people as you've seen the sanctions become more strict over these years?
Right. Well, the biggest thing that we're seeing in Iran right now is that medicine, vital medicine, especially for those who are dealing with chronic diseases, and cancer is no longer available. Survivors of chemical warfare, which we have in Iran, about 100,000 survivors of chemical warfare, don't have access to the vital medicine that they need. And anything from birth control pills to any sort of even over-the-counter stuff like, anything that has to deal with women's health or anything like that is extremely hard to come by today in Iran. And beyond the pharmaceuticals, also the price of meat and the price of everyday staple food has gone up at least 6 to 7 times in the past about 6-7 months.
During his address to the UN General Assembly, President Obama talked about the roots of the distrust between the United States and Iran.
The United States and Iran have been isolated from one another since the Islamic Revolution of 1979. This mistrust has deep roots. Iranians have long complained of a history of U.S. interference in their affairs and of America's role in overthrowing an Iranian government during the Cold War. On the other hand, Americans see an Iranian government that has declared the United States an enemy and directly or through proxies taken American hostages, killed U.S. troops and civilians, and threatened our ally Israel with destruction.
That was President Obama yesterday in his speech to the UN General Assembly. Can you talk about the significance of President Obama referring to the U.S.-backed coup against Mossadegh in 1953?
Well, it's huge that he did that. One of the main points of the nuclear issue for Iranians, and especially for the Iranian political elite, is that energy and not have control over energy. And so because of that, the nuclear issue is a national issue in Iran. So having Obama talk that way about the 1953 coup in the United Nations yesterday, I think was very significant, because he's trying to come out and say that at least the rhetoric is that we want to engage with Iran and understand the mutual respect between the two countries and understand the history of adverse involvement in the country. And so I think he's coming out and saying that term in office, and especially after the disputed elections in 2009 when people were protesting against the results. But interestingly enough, about let's say a year after his re-election, Ahmadinejad and Khamenei kind of went head to head. And for the last couple of years of Ahmadinejad Ahmadinejad's presidency, the supreme leader and him were not seeing eye to eye. And what's significant about that is that that became known to the Iranian public. There were news reports and there were rumors going around, and Ahmadinejad didn't even show up for work for about 11 days at a time. He didn't show up a couple of years ago.
And what was the nature of the dispute or the disagreements between them?
There seemed to be, I mean, there were rumors. Now, that on one side, one thing that's important to note is that Ahmadinejad and the people, his closest advisors, were very much against the clerical elite in Iran, and they wanted to push forward another sort of politics in Iran that moved away from the clerics. Khamenei, at the end of the day, is the cleric and has support among at least some portions of the clerical elite in Iran, Islamic Republic. But what's important to know is that because of all of this political infighting, there's a significant portion of both the Revolutionary Guards and Iran's politicians who were very much against Ahmadinejad.
You're an Iranian filmmaker. You're getting your PhD now here in New York at New York University, and you've been looking at chemical weapons. Of course, a big issue is Iran's support of Syria. In a recent headline, we reported that newly disclosed CIA files show the United States provided critical intelligence to help Iraq Saddam Hussein's days of the Iran-Iraq War. The United States provided Saddam Hussein with satellite imagery showing Iran was poised to exploit a hole in Iraq.
Where chemical weapons was used was 1981. In 1984, the Ayatollah Khomeini at the time and the Iranian leadership appealed to the United Nations and said that we need investigations to happen in Iran because we believe that there have been chemical weapons used here. 3 official investigations took place in the mid-1980s, and although there was significant evidence found and reported to the United Nations that chemical weapons had been used by the Iraqis in the war, all 3 investigations were ignored by the international body. At the time, because the United States and the Western powers were against the Islamic Republic, many of this did not come to fore, including the attack of 1988 against Iraq's Kurdish populations in Halabja, in which almost 5,000 people were killed.
Bombs during the Iran-Iraq War.
Iraqi warplanes dropped chemical bombs on us. My battalion was exposed. All the civilians in that area were also exposed.
From Narges Bajogli's film, The Skin That Burns, the significance of that experience today in Iran.
It's huge. There are a reported number of 100,000 survivors of chemical warfare in Iran. It's the biggest in the world. That includes both military survivors and civilians, because many civilian towns, especially in the Kurdish parts of Iran, were attacked by the significant the Iran-Iraq War. This sort of combination of chemical weapons had not been used in other parts of the world. And so what the Iranians are facing is that physicians nowhere in the world know exactly what's going on inside the bodies of the survivors of these attacks. So what we see is that it's a hard line, and for other skeptics, I think that Iran is in a position in which if it doesn't do something, there is so much discontent in the country on the ground itself that they are afraid of another sort of demonstration to happen, especially because of the economic situation. The Islamic Republic knows that. The Islamic Republic wants to stay. It does not want to go. And I think it's being very pragmatic in taking this approach.